Hello, and welcome to Astranti Connect. Today we're going to talk about a really important topic that you might have come across in your therapy journey so far, or even in your personal lives: reframing negative thoughts. We're going to talk about the different types of negative thought and why reframing is such an effective technique. So before we get into it, let's talk about negative thoughts. So we're all human and we all experience negative thoughts. Some of these negative thoughts might include things like, I'm not good enough, I always fail, nobody really cares about me. But when you see clients, it's these kinds of negative thoughts that can spiral into bigger issues like anxiety or depression if left unchecked. And as therapists, it's really important to remember that sometimes these thoughts aren't facts. Often, they're distorted versions of our reality, and that's where reframing comes in. So before we get into the process of reframing, let's look at why it works. So from a psychological perspective, negative thoughts are often rooted in cognitive distortions. Now, these are errors in thinking. They're patterns that we can develop that distort our reality. They sometimes lead to a negative view of ourselves, our future, and our lives. Let's look at a few common distortions together. So, our first common distortion is called catastrophizing, or thinking of the worst case scenario. So, an example of catastrophizing could be, I was 5 minutes late for a presentation, so it's going to go really badly and I'm probably going to get fired. This person is thinking of the worst possible case scenario, and they catastrophize in these thoughts because they've made a small mistake, when in reality, the outcome is probably not going to be that bad. So a second common distortion is called black and white thinking. Now this is thinking in extremes, seeing things as all good or all bad with no middle ground. An example thought for this could be, if I don't get 100% on my test, that means I've failed. So here the person views their success in extreme terms. It's either all good or all bad. And they're not considering that maybe if they've got 70% on the test and they've passed, that could be a good and positive outcome too. So our third and final distortion is called personalization. And this refers to blaming yourself for things that aren't entirely your fault. An example thought for this could be, the meeting went badly because I couldn't express myself properly. When in reality, the meeting could have gone badly for a number of different reasons. Here, the person is assuming blame for something that might be a group outcome. There could have been a number of reasons why the meeting didn't go properly. Perhaps it was scheduled for late afternoon, or there were a number of distractions available. So reframing works by getting your client to challenge these negative thoughts. We're not assuming that everything's perfect and positive. We just want our clients to look at their thoughts and assess whether they're based in reality. So now that we understand negative thoughts a little better, let's break down the process behind reframing them. So when helping a client reframe, first you need to identify the negative thought. This can be the most difficult part for clients. They come to you saying, I feel anxious. And what you need to do together is pinpoint the negative thought that's driving that anxiety. So the second process then is to challenge the negative thought. You should ask them questions like, is this always the case? What evidence do you have to suggest that this thought is true? In challenging the thought, what your aim is with the client is to see whether the thought is based in a cognitive distortion or whether it's based in reality. So the third and final step then is to replace the negative thought with something more balanced. For example, if your client said, I always fail, you could help them reframe the thought so that it becomes something more realistic. Like, I've had failures in the past, but I've succeeded as well, and I can learn from my mistakes. Here, you've encouraged your client to come up with a more balanced thought, a more realistic one, and one that's kinder to themselves. So again, the process isn't about turning a negative into a positive. It's more about shifting from an unhealthy, unbalanced mindset into one that's based more in reality. Now let's explore why the process is so useful. So psychologically, reframing breaks the cycle of negative thought. It's a bit like a habit. The more you think negatively, the more you're likely to think negatively in the future. So reframing actually breaks this cycle. It forces the client to think critically about their automatic thought and puts them in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Now, this is part of the brain that's associated with decision making and reasoning. This is important because it pulls the client out of their amygdala, or the part of their brain where their fears and anxieties might live. Scientific studies of reframing have actually shown that in practicing reframing over a long period of time, you can reduce levels of anxiety and depression. So reframing is especially useful in therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, where the focus is on how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interconnected. But it's really important to note that reframing is a really useful tool that can be used in many therapy types and settings. So remember, it's not about pretending that everything's fine. It's about finding helpful ways to view difficult situations. Which kinds of therapy do you feel reframing would work best? And how could you encourage your clients to reframe their negative thoughts when the feelings of anxiety and depression are so tough to deal with? Thank you for watching. If you found this video useful, remember to hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell so that you don't miss any more therapeutic tips that could help you on your journey. If you have any questions or thoughts, make sure to comment. We'd love to hear from you.